welcome into a very special edition of the Living Force podcast. I am one of your hosts, Eric Eilerson, and joining me today are two lovely fellas I get to hang out with all the time. The first is Dr. Corey Helton. How are you doing, sir?
I am doing excellent now that we have a wonderful guest this afternoon.
That's right. And not as wonderful, but still slightly wonderful as Dr. Charles Hankel. Hey, dude.
Hey, how's it going? I'm stoked to be here, but let's get to the most important person.
All right, the most wonderful person, of course, is the writer of the upcoming, much heralded, much hype-trained book, Star Wars Visions Ronin. Emma Mieko Candon has joined the show. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I am happy to be here with my equally wonderful hosts. You are all great.
Yes. All right, we can clip that out as well. We're going to play that before every show going forward.
As much as I love you.
Awesome. Oh, well, for those of you that have been living under a literature rock for the last few months, as you said, Emma is the author of the upcoming and as of today released, right here, Star Wars Visions Ronin. Which, I almost want to do a one-sentence pitch, but it's very hard to pitch this book. So, Emma, actually, what would your one- or two-sentence pitch be for this book you've written?
Well, when you're wandering around the world and people every so often ask you, hey, what do you do? Before I've had to tell them, well, I'm an editor and I edit anime nonsense books. And they're like, I don't quite know what that means, but okay. But now I get to tell them I wrote a Star Wars book. And it's Star Wars through the lens of Japanese history and mythology.
Love it. And and once you all get to read it, you'll understand just how intensely accurate and wonderful that is. So you know what? Let's just dive right into talking about it. Corey, we're going to do a little round robin bit of questioning for you here, Emma. So Corey, if you want to start us off, let's just dive right in.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think it would be sort of remiss of us to be on a Star Wars podcast and not ask you probably the most common question that anyone ever gets asked that does this type of thing is, if our listeners haven't heard you on some of the other interviews you've done, what is some of your, background to Star Wars, right? I mean, I know that, we talked earlier that we're sort of focused on the books and comics and the expanded universe. If you want to kind of tell us a little about how maybe you're exposed to that would be cool too. But what is sort of your introduction to all this?
Yeah, so it was accidental. Nobody planned this. It just kind of happened. My family was on vacation with another family, and we're at a river. And so, the kids are expected to be outside of the cabin, in the river, and it's very cool. I'm collecting rocks. I like that. But on the dinky little television, I pass by, and there's a man hanging upside down, surrounded by ice and snow and a Yeti. And he's reaching for something in a snowbank. And I couldn't look away from that point already. But then it whips out into his hand, and it's like a burning bright sword made of light. And I was there for the next 5 hours watching the rest of Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And it was over for me from then. I think I watched A New Hope later that weekend because it was one of those marathons that they do. Mm-hmm. And after that, once I got home, I was an early reader. So, 7, 8 years old, reading every book from the extended universe I could find in the library. A lot of it's going right over my head, but I'm absorbing all of it ravenously. And then, I can go to the bookstore and they've got those encyclopedias of 100 vessels or 100 characters or 100 species in Star Wars. And that's directing me to other content. And I'm like, oh, I got to see if any of my libraries have this one. Or I would be sitting in a part of the library, reading through a new book or the bookstore, reading, not buying. And gosh, yeah, that was a huge part of my childhood, all the way up until when I was a teenager. And I kind of fell off reading it as intensely. So I haven't actually read a lot of the new content, the legend stuff. Mm-hmm. I read a lot of, but it was a long time ago and it was very eclectic. Sure. So my knowledge is kind of patchy in a couple ways there. My knowledge is also pretty patchy of the present era because I'm catching up with it now because I was mostly tuned into the movies and stuff of the present day. And now I'm watching I watched all of Clone Wars in grad school because it was my cool down time.
Ah, yes.
But, like the new comics and the new books. I'm very much like at my beginning stage there, taking recommendations and going, ooh, yes, that's right up my alley.
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh my gosh. I was so swept away by the way you described that first viewing of like how specific with like the hanging in the snow. Like I feel like that's such an impactful moment for a young kid, and for obviously for that to still be burned so precisely into your mind is so it's so beautiful. And I think that there has to be so many of us that remember it in that way, but sometimes don't take the time to actually talk that out. So, listeners, viewers, if you haven't said that out loud how you watch Star Wars for the first time, do that, because that has inspired me to think about like sitting on my living room floor, like what color was the carpet? What was the temperature like? Because it was a big moment. Gosh, I love that.
That's actually a pretty big therapy trick. My wife is a marriage and family therapist. That's a kind of big therapy trip about helping people get grounded. Is to really think about the sensory things in your memories. What were smells associated with it? Like when you smell something, sometimes you get a whiff of like something being baked, and you just have a flash of memories come back to you. Yeah, it's kind of like that.
Wow. That's awesome. And also, like, I can see that, too, even in your writing style in Ronin, like, the way you use those senses and stuff to evolve. Again, no spoilers on the show. I guess we didn't say that up top. No spoilers for Ronin here, but it's very evocative. I guess I'll put that word on it.
I'm glad, because I feel like description is not something that comes intuitively to me. I've heard, like, I think it was written by Arkady Martine, who wrote A Desolation Called Peace is the second one. A Memory Called Empire, which came out like only a couple of years ago. But it won the Nebulas, I think. It's a very, very good book. But she has this craft essay on like your cheats, the things that for you as a writer come very, very naturally to you, and that you can just like always fall back on that. Like I can whip out 1,000 words of that easy. And for me, that's like concept stuff and dialogue, but like descriptions is actually something I have to work very, very hard on. It's not easy for me.
Well, what a good fake is what I'll say. To going through the book. My goodness. Wow. So speaking of that book, we usually do a couple pre-questions, but there's so much to get into with Ronin. So Charles, what's our first question about the Ronin process?
Well, so Ronin's full title, right, is Star Wars Ronin, a Visions novel. So it's obviously tied into Visions and that whole project. How did the timeline of that project kind of fit in with everything else? So was it that you heard about Visions first and then the book, or was the book brought to you first and then you found out more about the whole show? And on the heels of that, I have to ask, is it true that the manuscript for your upcoming book, The Archive Undying, was involved at all in getting you this gig?
So to the last, yes, absolutely it was, because as many people have noticed, I am not a published author. I will be, I think, the day this goes up, but as of right now, no books, no stories, no nothing. I've done published editorial work, but that's it. And so what I learned around this time last year from my agent was that Star Wars was looking for an author of Japanese descent for some kind of writing gig. And I had no idea what for. I could only assume it had to do with some character of Japanese descent or some other thing within the canon universe. And then in the first days of December, at that point, she sends in what's essentially my audition package, which is the first chapter and change of that manuscript, The Archive Undying, which currently we were talking about with an editor who eventually bought it about a month later. So that gets bought very end of October 2020. Then about a month later, very beginning of December 2020, we get the call that Star Wars is interested in me writing a book for them. And that was what I learned about the whole Visions project. And that was actually, if you look at the timeline, days or a week, not very long before they actually announced it to what was it? The shareholders meeting?
Oh yeah, that earnings
where-
call where it was like
Yeah.
11
Yeah.
shows. We're like, what in the world?
So that came out like a couple days after I had heard the pitch. I had been given the lay of the project and been like, here's the duel, here's what we can give you for it. We'll give you access to some other materials as production moves forward. So yeah, I learned about it like literally minutes in the history of the universe before the rest of you did.
Oh my
That is
God.
crazy. I love that. You know, we've talked to some of the older writers, like from the old days in Star Wars publishing, when everything was just kind of from the hip. It seems like talking to folks like John Jackson Miller, like they've made it seem like all of publishing was this chaotic, crazy thing, and like it is somewhat refreshing to hear some of that is here still. Like, you know, it's just sort of the nature of the game in publishing. So,
Wow.
Yeah. No, that one. So I had a month to draft an outline and get that approved. And then I was writing it from early January to mid-April. So
Wow.
that was the drafting time. And after that, it was just, you know, like revision passes and so forth.
Wow. And I guess that's like one thing, you know, obviously not being in the publishing industry, we can kind of guesstimate and stuff. It feels quick. Like, this is less than a year ago, this was an idea, and now it's bound. It's next to me. Like, this is a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy because, you know, like the Archive Undying had been bought literally a month before. And they're like, all right, we're going to put this out in 2023. And that seems a little far away, but it's because all the pandemic stuff has juggled publishing dates around.
Right.
And we had already gotten some whispers of the supply chain panic we're currently in the middle of.
yeah.
Ugh.
And so I was like, all right, 2023, that's great. I have time to mentally prepare for this.
What else could happen?
A month later, it's like, hey, 10 months. You got 10 months to get used to this.
Jeez. That's
So-
fantastic.
Well-
Yeah, nice little reminder for all our listeners. There's a huge publishing shortage right now, or printing shortage, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to pre-order your books,
Yeah.
you better do it soon because, you know, we're about to hit a drought.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, in a big way. Because like my day job is also publishing with like a smaller publishing house that does all the anime and manga stuff. Oh my God, we're definitely feeling the pinch. It
Yeah.
like it comes up at different times where we're like, oh God, you gotta get this. You thought you had another month of this book. You absolutely don't, because if it doesn't get printed today, it will not get printed for
Wow.
the next like
Yeah.
6 months.
Crazy.
Well, I mean, I guess on that, like, two things jump to my mind. Number one, your first book is handling the Star Wars publishing and publicity cycle, so everything from here on out should be pretty simple, I feel. You know, as far as secrets goes, as far as all that goes, I feel like it might be a little easier. But then I guess the day this does go out, number two, a formal congratulations on being a published author. Like, as of today,
That's
forever,
awesome.
you're a published author. That's amazing.
Thank you.
That's so
It's-
cool.
It's huge. It's I very rapidly, again, surprise, you got to do it now.
Yeah.
You don't have 2 years to get used to it. So I've been trying to do that, and I was absolutely convinced I was going to be a basket case, because I kind of was at different
Sure.
points in the months leading up to this. Like, I was so neurotic that I couldn't do anything, and I had to like have a Skype call with a dear friend or another just to get me through the day so I could like keep working. Otherwise,
Sure.
I'd just be curled up like, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God. And it's all drained out of me wonderfully. So now I can just be like, hi, people. You're cool. How's it going?
Yeah.
God, love that. And hey, you know what? Speaking of which, our next question is about you more so than the book, because one thing that I loved as I was reading through your author bio, and it describes you as, quote, a chronically ill queer cyborg, and it's one of the coolest bios I've ever read. And I wanted to ask you specifically, can you tell us how your blood has literally been studied for science?
Okay, so this is interesting. Just trigger warning for anyone who's been dealing with some of like the more severe side effects of the pandemic.
Totally.
The worst
Thank you.
case scenario in COVID happened to me in 2012. So I was hospitalized for multiple organ failure. Specifically, the lungs were the one that got hardest hit. And this all happened because I caught a virus. And They tried to figure out like what had caused it, and they couldn't. They did. It was just too late. It had gone out of my system already, and it was just that my body was shutting down. So I was teaching in Japan at the time, so I survived because one, Japan has nationalized healthcare. Two, because I was at a research university hospital, so they have a lot of resources and a lot of people who are used to thinking inventively and willing to take these sort of ambitious risks to try and keep a patient alive. And also, I was the only person who was as sick as I was, who was in that ICU, but I was in the ICU for 3.5 months.
Wow.
And
That's crazy.
I was on a respirator and I was on ECMO, which is the one where they take your blood out of you, oxygenate it, and put it back in. And they saved my life with massive amounts of steroids, just like 3 successive waves, just trying to kickstart my lungs and get them going again. And they did manage it. And like just at the end of the day, like I was able to be downgraded to the emergency ward and then to a therapy hospital essentially. And from there, eventually 6 months after I was hospitalized, they deemed me healthy enough to survive the plane trip home.
Wow.
Wow.
That
Which is where I spent the next 1.5 years learning how to walk again.
Wow.
And
My goodness.
how to breathe and how to deal with my lungs. And then I went to New York to study for grad school. And in the middle of it, I was having these really severe hip pains, and my wife and my father finally like bullied me into going to the doctor, where they discovered that my hip bones were broken, because one of these side effects of massive amounts of steroids is that in the joints of your body, the blood supply can be cut off from your bones. So it turns out your bones are alive, specifically with marrow. And if they don't get blood, the marrow rots and goes away. So I had been hiking around New York with these 2 like femoral heads that were just empty. And so they were slowly caving in. And at one point, when I finally saw an x-ray of it, I cracked up, and I think I called it because, and I'm just remembering this now, like, it looks like the Death Star.
Wow,
God.
that is crazy, and so it's pretty similar to like the progression of COVID, kind of as we've seen in the last year too.
Oh gosh, exactly. It's wild because like every once in a while they'll be like, oh yeah, no, they're starting to use ECMO. I'm like, yep, that makes sense. Like people are being saved with steroids. Yep, that makes sense. They should watch out for a vascular necrosis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if my story is much more common in the next 5 years.
Yeah,
Sure.
But so the use my blood for science thing comes from in Japan, toward the end of it, when they had like, they were pretty secure in the likelihood of my survival. The head surgeon came to me and was like, would you be willing to let us take some blood samples so we can like write about what we did here and study, you know, like the fact that you survived. So that's how my blood's been studied. And so, yeah, I signed that away happily, or my mom did, because like I was basically immobile. But
Sure.
and then the cyborg comes from the fact that, you know, my hips were broken, so I had to get them replaced. So I have new hips. Hopefully they'll last for a long while.
Crazy.
That's the best way to describe that. Yeah, Corey,
Charles and
tell
I
why this is cool.
are both physicians. We're medical physicians.
Oh,
and
hey.
I can attest to everything that you just said is like mind-blowingly crazy. Like, you're right. The fact that you're alive is amazing. Like that is a crazy survival story. That's so cool.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time talking to health professionals in like the 5 years after, because every time I was going in going like, hey, we haven't quite fixed this problem, they'd be like, okay, well, tell me your story. I'd be like, all right, buckle in.
So here's the thing.
How much time we got, right? Just a 40-minute appointment? I hope so.
I got so used to medical students being brought in to look at me, and I was like, yeah, okay, that's just my
Oh my.
It's wild.
Wow.
So specifically, I have bronchiectasis. So you like, presumably you're more likely to know what that is.
Sure.
basically just means my lungs are scarred and they're just not very good at doing the expand and contract thing that they're supposed to do. But yeah, hello.
Yes.
Wow.
Wild.
You have earned every bit of that title.
Yeah.
I say, like, you gotta, like, and also, if anyone has like chronic illness or kind of things like that, if you want to call yourself a cyborg, I think we need to get that going more in the mainstream. That's a way better descriptor for that whole story.
Yeah, I gotta be honest. I was expecting like some pretty normal genetic disorder or something like that, but that is like the most incredible thing I've ever heard. Like you are absolutely a cyborg, and I love that. Right? I know.
Yeah, no.
I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for you to like pull out an eye and be like, and yeah, so this is the thing that I used to look through walls with, right? Like seriously, that's crazy.
I mean, I'm ready. Whenever they want to do a tune-up or an upgrade, I'm ready for it.
Oh man, how do we even transition from that? That's just so incredible.
Inorganically, we do it inorganically. By saying this is the next part.
Star Wars podcast. We're not doctors. Okay, all right. So, all right, I wanna ask you a little bit about sort of your background with your Japanese descent, right? So you kind of talked about your Japanese descent impacting work throughout your life, and you've specifically mentioned the work of Akira Kurosawa. Is that how you say that? I want to make sure I'm pronouncing it correct. Yep. And he's George Lucas himself is said to have talked about him as being sort of inspiration for a lot of his projects. Do you have a favorite project? What films do you kind of think about most as incorporating? What is your sort of, I guess, background with that inspiration?
I actually, in the very nerdy way, I watched a lot of anime when I was a kid. And, being a kid is a great time to absorb garbage because it's how you develop taste, right? And that was something someone said to me once. And I've treasured it to this day because it really helped me reframe my viewing experience because, anything you consume is something you can learn from, regardless of whether it's to your taste or the relative quality of it. If you want to get into that, I think you can have a lot of debates about quality and the meaning of that word. But yeah, I watched a lot of anime, and then as a student in undergrad, I was lucky enough to take, and I've mentioned this one a couple times, a course on pop culture and literature in post-war Japan. And that colored a lot of my context, in particular because at the time I was working on my thesis, which was partly about the way we narrativize racial history in Hawaii. And that involved, talking about the ways different groups in Hawaii have talked about their history here in the islands.
Sure.
And for the Japanese, which is, my whiteness, my white father was a transplant here, but my Japanese family is the one that's really local, that has that history. And so learning about the way that Japanese people in Japan were talking about their experience of war and the time after that, and paralleling that with the way that Japanese Americans were experiencing that and talking about it. That was really, really useful and very, very powerful. And so that I was also consuming a lot of literature in that regard. And just before that, I had taken a class just for fun, which was amazing. And it was the cultural history of Japanese monsters. And it was kind of just an excuse to talk about Japanese
my
folklore.
classes sucked.
It was fucking amazing.
Great.
I'm sorry. Should I curse? Can I curse?
Yes, you can curse.
Yeah, sure, go for it.
We're absolutely somewhat of a PG-13 show, as I'm sure that our listeners can.
Go for it.
No, you are good.
You're good.
Yeah, no, I was very lucky to be at Barnard, and when you're at Barnard, you can take classes freely at Columbia. Like I was saying, your academics are very well integrated. It's just the social life and trying to live with your friends here or there that's very complicated.
Yeah.
So there's a truly tremendously good East Asian studies for language and culture program over there. And I didn't know about that when I went. And I probably didn't even think much of it because, you know, UH, the University of Hawaii, also has a good one. So I'm like, oh, big whoop. I got to take this course from this guy who's just amazing. He has like this whole, he studies Godzilla in depth. He's written books about it. It's so good.
Oh my gosh!
Corey, you're a doctor.
I want
that
just
sucks.
I know it's so stupid. Like I don't like. What did I even? Yeah,
What are you doing?
Want to just get beer and talk to you about all of your life experiences now.
Awesome.
Your life is just so much more interesting than mine has been. Like let me tell you, this is fantastic.
Okay, look, I have such a deep, profound respect and admiration for healthcare professionals, in part because of my experience, because, you know, like you guys are the reason I still exist. Thank you for all the work you do.
Well, thank you for keep writing Star Wars. It's the only way we can stay sane, okay? So
happily.
Yeah.
There we go.
I do so with utmost adoration and respect for the work you do.
Well, thank you very much.
Awesome.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to hear you talk. You know, you can really hear the passion and the interest that you have kind of in obviously East Asian history, Japanese history, specifically with your heritage. And with you writing a Star Wars book, if you're going to write it from a historical framework, it makes sense that you chose to do it from a Japanese framework. But at the same time, are there specific aspects of Japanese history, like imperialism, that make you think that it's just a good choice if you're going to write a book like this? Because I couldn't help but notice, you know, empire doesn't necessarily mean the empire like we've always understood it in Ronin.
Yeah, no, 100% spot on. You see into my mind.
Yes.
But yeah, just one of the first questions I had to ask when I was given the duel, which is using the settings that Jidaigeki is interested in, which is like this shogunate or imperial Japan. Like, okay, so the context of empire is necessarily going to change because Japan has a different relationship with empire than, you know, the United States does. And I was talking with, forget who it was, someone did a wonderful job of pointing out, I think it might have been Brian Young at Full of Sith. He did a great job of pointing out that like a lot of the things I was thinking about in terms of like when you are a citizen of empire and how do you deal with that, because you aren't necessarily a rebel, you're just kind of living with it, and maybe you are living with it but you also don't like what it's doing in places, either within your borders or outside of it. But do you have the power to do anything about that? Maybe not. And like, what do you do? How do you live? And he made the great point of like, that's really seems to be present in the way George Lucas is thinking about Luke Skywalker in A New Hope, because here's this kid on, you know, this outskirts planet in the middle of far gone nowhere who thinks the only way I'm going to be able to live a life outside of this is through the empire. And that was 100% correct. But like, that's just sort of like amplified here. So I feel like it was already very present in Star Wars. And I didn't have the language to articulate why that felt true until he pointed that out. But I really do think it's not weird for the empire to be positioned as like the status quo, because it extremely is in the genre of that we're riffing off of with Jidaigeki, which has already its lineage with Star Wars, but it's also just like kind of there within Star Wars itself.
Yeah.
Wow.
Dang.
Just like, I'm so here for this right now.
Man, Corey, you're gonna like this book, man.
I'm so excited. I might go read it like literally as soon as we're done with this. I'm just like so jacked for this right now. Like I love history so much, and it really seems like so much has influenced your writing? Like, I really want to read the manuscript that got you the job, because it's gotta be, it's
Yeah,
gotta
that's
be
2023.
Like,
That's
oh
coming.
man, I just can't wait for
Keep an eye
that.
out for it.
Yeah.
My goodness. Well, so God, my brain is like just melting with all that information. I love all that history stuff. So let's switch gears for a second on the technical writing aspect of it too, because Ronin is such a beautifully, uniquely written book. And one of the coolest features that I loved about it was the fact that character names change in narration depending on who's featured in the chapter. Like the Ronin has descriptors, the Traveler, Kuru is referred to as Homicidal Sith Lady, which is my personal favorite. So I want to ask you, what made you decide to give each point of view like their own agency within narration, not only their own dialogue?
One, it's because I'm very used to writing in close POV. I tend to write really from the perspective of the character who has command of POV. Like other authors are a little better at taking like that step back. I'm not practiced in that. And another thing was that an early studio directive was that the Ronin was just the Ronin. He does not have a name. And Tom and I very early both went like, oh, okay, so Batman. And like there's this episode, I think I was trying to figure out which episode it was. I think it's actually Batman Beyond, where someone's trying to mind control old Bruce Wayne, and they keep on like talking to him like they're his own thoughts, saying Bruce da 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 da. And he shakes them off at the end, and they're like, "Oh my God, how'd you do that?" And he's like, "I don't call myself Bruce."
I literally just binge watched Batman Beyond like 2 months ago, and I knew exactly what you're talking about. That was the most. Yeah, I forget what that guy's name is, like Mindbender or something like that. But it's like that is like the most Batman thing ever. It's like, I don't call myself Bruce, only Batman. It's just like, please, this is so perfect.
It hurts me. It's so sad, but it's so interesting and so on point with the character. And like we both immediately thought of that episode. We're like, okay, cool. He's the Ronin.
Oh my God! Now the reread is gonna make even more sense, and I want the audiobook to be Batman voice now. Like I want all of that.
Oh man!
Wow.
Yeah, I haven't heard the audiobook yet, but I'm excited to, because I've listened to the guy who's narrating it, Joel De La Fuente. I've like looked up the things he's read. I'm like, oh, he has a nice voice. I'm eager for this. But
Awesome.
yeah, so that everything with names should be seen as a reflection of that core fact that this guy has forsaken his name. He has a moniker. That's it. And so names can be very fluid in this, but also like I had to let other people call him something else because there was no way I was gonna have people calling him the Ronin.
Hey, the Ronin, can you come over here? That'd be great.
Yeah. So you know, like that. But as a consequence, like every other instance of someone having a name or laying claim to a name or having a really close relationship with their name or also trying to like throw that name aside, it's just part of that same dynamic, right? That's the origin.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm so excited for we always talk about the books with full spoilers a month after release, and then we can kind of be free.
Oh, okay.
There are particular, you were just mentioning like characters that wanted to like throw aside their names and do things that I'm like, in a month I am very excited to talk about that particular stuff because it's so effective for a book that when you set that up for the characters that just have titles to when actual names are brought in at certain points. It threw me for a loop in a way that like I haven't really experienced before because I'm not familiar with close POV writing. So it's like, ooh, it's like when someone puts a teacup down in a restoration play, you're like, ooh, that means a lot in this universe. Like I don't care about it normally. That's for my theater friends out there. Yeah. Love that.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so cool.
I'm speaking, kind of going off that a little bit. Speaking of the Traveler, I think the Traveler may be like the most featured non-binary Star Wars character maybe ever, and with the show and the book, which is super awesome, super inclusive. So as an author that also uses they pronouns, how awesome was it to sort of add that to Star Wars canon?
I didn't know if I was going to get away with it, but here's the thing I want to put out. I never got a no for any of the queer stuff I put on in this book.
Awesome.
Either from the
Sick.
editors or the story group.
Good.
Everybody was extremely cool. No barriers were put up. Everything we talked about had everything to do with like how we were navigating the relationship in this reinterpretation of Star Wars, and when they wanted things to be like brought closer to the Star Wars canon, or they were like giving me a little more leeway to get a little more wild. That was what we were talking about. This stuff just like did not come up, and I'm very grateful to them for that. Yeah. But I very quickly decided that, you know, I wanted this character to have they, them pronouns be kind of like ambiguous in that sense, because I think it's very clear early on, like what I'm thinking of when I created this character and like the role they play in the story. It's very in alignment with Kitsune, and who are like the fox spirits in Japan, and they're tricksters, right? So the Kitsune also appears, or a likeness of it appears in Korean and Chinese folklore. But in those, they're a little less ambiguous, they're a little more sinister. So, but in Japanese folklore, you have the kitsune, and they do sometimes possess people and drive them crazy. And they do sometimes play tricks that are like kind of nasty, but sometimes it's just very playful. And also there is Inari, who is a fox kami, a deity, who is a deity of the harvest and of good fortune. So there's more ambiguity around what kitsune mean in the context of Japanese folklore. And it was just very appropriate for this character to be occupying a space of like, we don't know what they're up to, let alone what they're thinking. And also like kitsune can take on the form, they're shapeshifters. They can take on the form of women or of men, and it can be the same kitsune doing either. And so my question was like, are they going to be gender fluid? Are they going to be gender ambiguous? And I ended up just going with ambiguous.
Wow. It's so like thoughtful and fantastic. I mean, I don't know. We talk all the time about like, you know, the galaxy is such a huge place with aliens and people. Of course, there are all different types of people in Star Wars. Like, that's not even a question. And it is refreshing to hear that is also the publishing initiative as well.
Yeah. And
yes.
Oh my gosh, the puzzle piece is
super cool about it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
My mind's just breaking. Knowing this character now, I'm like, yeah. The
shapeshifter idea, that is really, really cool. I've never really thought or considered that before. That is a really, really cool perspective.
Yeah. Also, to our non-binary friends, I know we talked about being cyborgs earlier. If you want to call yourself shapeshifters, I think that would also be rad. I think we should also start putting that forward. That would be great.
I love that. That's great.
Wow. All right, Charles, I feel
like I'm
out of my ears here.
So much.
I know.
Probably more in this interview than we've ever had with an author before.
And in college, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely med school. That was a waste of time.
That's because we weren't in the right classes, guys. The Japanese monsters class is where it was at. So I'm curious, kind of getting back to the creation of this story. When you're making a novel like Ronin that's describing really all these different kind of pieces of history in an alternate timeline, you know, the Sith and Jedi War, the Jedi's Lords, all that kind of stuff. Do you actually mark all of that out before you sit down and start writing the story? Or did it just kind of come to you and form as you were writing?
I'm very much an outliner. So there was some structure. I don't think there was a strict timeline. And that's why when I was reading through it, I'd go like, oh, I have to fix when that happened. So, and there are some things that are like a little ambiguous to me about like when that happened. But yeah, no, I kept it to some very nice, easy numbers to remember. Like, okay, 20 years is meaningful, 10 years is meaningful.
Mhm.
These are all things that we can very much like track and keep like an eye on. Because I didn't do that in the archive, I'm dying and I'm suffering for it.
Pre-orders available soon. Ish.
So yeah, no, definitely in the iterative process of figuring out like what the story is going to be also means figuring out what is the history that it's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that I knew, some of it I was figuring out as I was going, because what I've learned about my own process is that if I do too much pre-planning, then I ignore it and then make more work for myself.
Yeah,
Sure.
So,
probably kind of a healthy way to look at the growing in complexity of Star Wars timeline anyway, which is kind of all over the place, quite frankly. So
yeah, it was fun reading this book because you know, so much of our life, especially in like the stuff we usually read and stuff we do, is figuring out, all right, what BBY, ABY, wait, this month the Millennium Falcon was in this sector, so Han Solo couldn't have shown up here. And it's just like, to see a universe that's like, I know nothing, I don't know whose side who was on, I don't know what this planet is. It was so
clever. It's very clever.
Yeah, and it was something I realized that I kind of take advantage of sometimes when I'm reading, or take for granted when I'm reading other books, to be like, oh, cool, I kind of know what's going on. And when reading Ronin, it was fun to read your history, to be like, I don't know when this happened. Let's find out. So I thank you for the 20 years, 10 years, because you're right. It is nice. And it's way better than figuring out what happened 7.4 years ago in a different sector of space.
We have somebody on the team that's like basically his entire job.
His entire job.
And he's just like a madman.
He's your story group.
Yes, that's it. He's
oh
like,
my God.
We call him Trevor the Timeline Guy. And that's what he does. I mean, he just like, he has this crazy documents and he does it. It's nuts.
He's the Youtini story group guy. That's amazing.
That's all. Yeah.
All right, we got to update his Slack channel name
exactly,
now.
Exactly. Yep.
Oh my God. So, and of course, talking about things that you created just for Ronin so far. One of the things I also loved, you described the Force in really cool ways. It's the black current and the white flare keep showing up throughout the book. And they're so much more active than just like a light, dark, passive, like a literal binary of these two things. So I want to ask, how did you settle on this like fire and water imagery for something that we have kind of known about for 40 years, that you essentially redefine how it works?
So that was also part of bringing Star Wars closer to the Japanese lens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're looking at like, okay, so what does Sith mean in this context?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so if this guy is a Sith and a Ronin, that means he's kind of like departed from the state. That means that contextually Jedi are of the state, da 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 da. And in this case, I was looking at the Force and like the light side and the dark side, I think, are a little ambiguously understood. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And I think that's true because a lot of us can argue about what exactly they mean for days.
Sure.
Because they don't have a very clear. Yeah. And my suspicion is, I think we all like pretty much understand that the Force derives from ideas of like chi or ki, which themselves are connected to Taoism, which is rooted in, it is originally a Chinese folk religion and faith, and that's like been incorporated into various beliefs and systems. And it's also present in Japan in various ways. And in Taoism, you don't just have chi, you have the understanding of yin and yang. And my supposition is that the light side and the dark side are related to that. However, yin and yang are nothing like the light side and the dark side, which have a pretty clear moral resonance with them, right? Regardless of whether people like talk about like finding balance, like, well, that would be easier to stomach if the Sith didn't constantly murder people.
Yeah, a little bit.
So like that's one of the reasons that you can talk for so long about like, well, what does this mean in the context of canon? So not wanting to wrestle with that and being like, I don't think I also didn't think that sort of morality play would resonate very well within Jidaigeki, which is not very interested in heroes so much as this guy has done good things, and also in the name of that good thing he's pursuing, he does a thing that he can't countenance, that he thinks, well, I didn't like that. And what does that mean? Do I keep on doing that thing I don't like? Or do I stop pursuing the thing that I think is good and worthwhile? Or, what do I do? And he's not the only one struggling with that within the context of the narrative. Like, that's what Jidaigeki likes to do. So it didn't really make sense to me to keep the light side and the dark side as they appear in canon.
Yeah.
For this kind of story. So in that sense, like, just falling back on reflections of like, all right, so yin is darkness, it is water, it is flow, it is passivity, it is the moon, and yang is brightness, it is white, it is the sun, it is heat and energy, and just having this sense of like they both exist in the world. Everybody understands that everybody has different like affinities with it, and some people have the ability to actually like tap into that, but it's very necessary for training and focus to be part of that. Like, you can't do the kinds of things that Jedi exist in this world do unless you very specifically trained to do that. Because again, it was all about bringing it closer to what I feel like is pretty obviously its source material.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, this whole time, I'm just like, I just sit back and listen. I'm like, all right, we're doing an interview, right? We're talking. Like, this is like, it's so wild listening to this, knowing the book, and knowing that people are going to listen and then read the book. And like, there's just the way you have crafted this universe around these things. It's like, it's just so cool. It's just like the lamest way to say it. It's just so cool.
Yeah, it is
and
such
different.
It is one of the most unique takes that we've seen done to Star Wars ever. I mean, the entire Visions initiative and this book, it's just all like, you just took really, really cool cultural themes and applied it to a well understood kind of universe, and it's awesome and done really, really well. So
yeah,
I mean,
and
I
think.
So,
yeah, sorry. I was gonna say, it reminded me too. I think going forward, these concepts are gonna make so much sense to like canon stories in the quote unquote the normal universe, the 616 universe of Star Wars or whatever we have. Like, taking these ideas, they are present, and I think that's one of the things I think a lot of folks that read Ronin are gonna take from it. It's gonna be like, I don't see how you can then read future stories without taking these ideas and being like, he did a force push. It's like, oh, that's not just a force push. Is it white flare? Is he using black current? Like, what's the deal? How is this flowing? And I'm just, it's so cool to make something so universal in its own pocket realm.
Yeah, it's only possible because it is, Star Wars, I've been saying, like, has such a strong narrative DNA that it's so easy to work with and reinterpret, and that's why we can do like Marvel 616 and Ultimates like, with it, because it's so plainly itself, no matter like what trappings you put on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that leads kind of perfectly into the next question, because obviously Ronin is incredibly unique as Star Wars novels go, but it still undoubtedly feels Star Wars, right? Like that's pretty undeniable. So kind of beyond those surface level things that we associate with Star Wars, the spaceships, the lightsabers, all those sorts of things, what elements do you think really makes something Star Wars?
I have two sort of aesthetic opinions about what qualifies Star Wars as Star Wars. And one is that everything's a little bit grimy.
Yep.
Everything's
dirty
very
sci-fi.
Like if a thing is broken, either you know how to fix it, or you get a guy to fix it, or you can't fix it. You just have to live with it.
Hydro spanner.
And and like maybe you don't know how to do that, so you like whack it a couple times and pray. And the other thing, my other guiding light, is that people are constantly whining. Often like Han Solo running through the Death Star complaining about being shot at. That's peak Star Wars to me.
Yes.
That's
Um,
fantastic. Also, the
It's so
fan community, if we're being real. Oh man, that's fantastic.
We imitate what we love, right? That's the...
Exactly. I also love that she
but they
basically
do
just
it in a very
described.
funny way.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. And I love that you basically just described like the Youtini like branding mood board too. It's just like grimy and dirty and lived in. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, like that's entirely what it is. So like when I'm thinking about, how to craft a scene, I want to give it texture and make it palpable. And I also want to give people very petty opinions about it.
Yeah.
My goodness, Emperor Palpable. Yes, he's my favorite character in All Star. It was right there. It was right there.
It is.
My gosh.
God.
Yeah, there is something weird about, we don't dive in too often to like the Star Wars, Star Trek debate. Or, like everyone loves what they love. There is something about other sci-fi when you go and the ships just like shine. I'm like, Padme's ship shines. That's it. Yeah. We are allowed one shiny spaceship. The rest must be dirty. The rest must make the coolest ship in the galaxy is on like empty tank of gas the entire saga.
Yeah,
I know.
And like with
there's
Ronin,
some Tumblr post about like the Millennium Falcon weed van. Like, yeah, that's accurate.
That's the thing. And like Ronin is such the deal. Like all the characters in Ronin, there is some whining, definitely some whining, and like there is that bit of like these villages are not clean. Like we haven't mentioned him a ton because there are so many things to talk about in this book. But our buddy Hatroid is always just bumming around in dirt. The real star of the book, B556, or Hatroid as he should be known.
Yeah.
Like it's just so cool to see all these pieces that we know mixed with other kinds of grime and mixed with tea and mixed with like all these different parts of it because it is such the universe we know in a way we've never seen it. And now going forward, every book I open, I'm gonna look for the grime and I'm gonna look for the wine. And if it's not there, I'm sorry. It's not Star Wars. It doesn't work. Oh my gosh. But as we come around to our end here, first of all, oh my gosh, thank you for coming on the show. This has been just so much fun. I've learned more than I ever thought, and have never wanted to reread a book more. So I'm very excited about it. Everyone listening, I hope that you have already opened your copy while listening to this, and that you got yours because you pre-ordered like a smart person. Pre-order.
Be careful
but we do have
that supply chain.
Come on, how about the supply chain? You know you love physical media. Are you gonna read it now? No, but it'll be on the shelf. Come on, we know how this goes. But we do always love to ask a question at the end of all of our interviews, and this one is very interesting because, like you said, this is your first published work. It's thereby your first Star Wars published work, but you are writing in this universe. You are adding something so unique and beautiful to it that will leave a legacy of some sort. This will be remembered as what it is in the Star Wars community. So what would you hope, even just based on this first piece, will be your Star Wars legacy when people look back 10, 20 years from now at your contribution to Star Wars?
That it's a conversation piece with the canon itself. Ooh. Because what I was trying to do with this was very much talk to and with the canon, not challenge it, but have this organic conversation with it, because I'm not going fie upon canon. I'm going, no, let's build upon it and like have that reflection back and forth, which is so much the relationship of Japanese and US media present in Visions, but like its lineage too and its backstory, everything that's coming together to create it. And that was very present on my mind as I was writing the book. And it's very much the kind of conversation I like to have. So I hope that worked.
I mean, also, fie upon canon, new shirt. Just let's get that marked up. But yeah, it did.
Yeah,
I think this interview is a testament to the fact that it
for sure.
Yeah. I mean, as far as we're concerned, and as far as I know folks when they read this book are concerned, this will be far from your last edition to Star Wars in either the Ronin world, in the canon world, in the Tatooine Rhapsody world. I don't know what's going to happen going forward, but it's something so special. And you have already been such a delight in this fandom online and in every interaction. And we're so glad to count you among our Star Wars world now. It's such a joy.
I've been so happy. I was very nervous about coming online because I'm not really naturally a social media kind of person, but you guys make it so easy to be there, and I enjoy my time, which is not something a lot of people can say about social media, I feel.
No,
That's
no.
true. That's very true.
Absolutely not. Scum and villainy, hive, et cetera, et
Oh
cetera.
my God, yeah. Oh, the Mos Eisley of the internet. How grim.
Well, there are some people that have not found this glorious corner of the internet. We would like to give you a time. Where can people find you online? And we know you got Ronin coming out, but this is now the official time to plug the next project as well as you like. So the floor is yours.
It's true. Okay, so hi, I can be found mostly on Twitter at Emma Candon, which is EMMACANDON. Theoretically, I'm also on Instagram and Tumblr at mcandon, EMCANDON. Keep an eye out for my next book, The Archive Undying. I have a deadline for revisions in January, so start to trickle out after that. So yeah, that one's about divine AIs, giant robots made of bone, and people dragged screaming toward revolution.
Oh my
So-
god.
I thought the Ronin tagline was good. Bone robots?
I'm just
Yeah, we
I-
couldn't
Robones?
get giant.
Oh, my
Okay,
goodness.
so for a while we were joking that the title would be Giant Bone Naruto versus Feral Gundam, which is a very accurate description. But we
Oh
couldn't get
my
it past
God.
legal, so
SEO is our enemy this day. That we were robbed of that. But listen, all you listening, put that in your heart when you're reading this in 2023. Oh my goodness. Well, again, thank you so much. You are welcome back anytime. We hope to talk about so many projects. And again, congratulations on this book. It is something so special. And all of you listening, I hope that you take everything that Emma said that blew our brains in the last hour, and you take that with you as you're reading through Ronin. Yeah. Any final thoughts to our listeners who are about to open your book for the first time?
thank you. I've written it so that it can be something that I'd like it to be a gift to people who love Star Wars as much as I do, because certainly the most joy I get out of approaching a new Star Wars story is feeling like it's made by someone who has also engaged very deeply with the narrative DNA and just like has a lot of thoughts and feelings and adoration for what it is and its place in the world.
Well,
And
I
I've
mean-
tried to do that too.
and you nailed it. I hope that someone picks up this book and they get the feeling of seeing Luke Skywalker hanging from an icy ceiling on a TV by a river. So if that's you, make sure you let Emma know on Twitter. Tell everyone you love about this book and tell them to order it before the supply chain runs out. Emma, thank you so much. And to all of you listening, go read Ronin right now. Come back in a month for our round table. May the force be with you.